Hello guys, my name is MasterOfRoflness and I'm here to give you guys a unit guide of the Total War Rome 2 faction known as the
Suebi.
A little bit of info about the
Suebi.
before we get underway is that they are one of 3 barbarian factions currently in the game, and as such do not have access to missile cav or pike units, but however make up for that with superb melee infantry and morale enhancing as well as disrupting abilities for those units. All units for the
Suebi
have the abilities of resistances to cold, which allows units to receive less fatigue in the snow, and hide, which allows units to hide in the forests or in shrubs if you have a light unit that you're controlling. Before we talk about the melee units, let's discuss their abilities first. The abilities all of the units share would be Shield Wall, which puts your units into a shield-like formation and increases the melee defense, armor strength, bracing against charging units, and increases the shield strength of the particular unit in question. This ability will, however, lower your movement speed, so do keep that in mind. Another ability would be Frenzy, which when activated will increase the charge bonus as well as the weapon damage of the unit, but in time the unit will become more exhausted, so don't use this while running along a large field. Now, let's take a look at the melee units, which are the Bloodsworn, Club Levies, Sword Masters, and the badass Berserkers. Bloodsworn and Club Levies are basically the same unit with slight differences in stats. Even the damn portraits are similar. Club Levies and Bloodsworn differences in stats would be in attack and armor, in which Club Levies have less melee damage but more armor. The weapon attacks for both units have a 10 armor pen and a 5 base weapon damage, making these units good at facing off against heavily armored units, but they are still at the bottom of the barrel in terms of damage output. Currently, the use of Club Levies and Bloodsworn can be summed up with one word: meat shield. Sure, the armor pen is good for a unit as cheap as this, but the stats all around are way too low to have them become the base of your army, and even in flanking attacks, these guys still rout in 2 seconds flat. It's crazy. Both units are very cheap, however 230 funds goes for the Club Levy, while 340 goes for the Bloodsworn. As it stands, these units should only be used as a flanking force, but even then they are still very weak units. They're also weak overall in upfront confrontations with other units, and honestly, if Bloodsworn and Club Levies are really bad at flanking attacks, the argument could be made that why not get a Berserker, but I guess it comes down to preference. Do you want more units on the field, or do you want more highly trained specialized units? That's really what it comes down to. The next 2 units are very different to one another, so comparing is dumb. The next unit in our melee list would be Berserkers, with excellent offensive capabilities, which includes high melee attack and charge bonus output. However, with very little armor, it makes them very vulnerable to ranged units. This unit has new abilities which fit their Costco brand name, Berserker. One of these abilities is ironically called Berserk, which makes the unit shit his pants, turn into a hula hoop, killing everyone in his path. That is an enemy unit, of course. Headhunt, which increases melee attack and morale of the unit, but decreases the Berserker's melee defense, is really good for when you want to chop down some of those heads of the enemy. However, if you're in an upfront confrontation with another enemy unit, it could be very bad because the melee defense is going to be the only thing that saves you, and unfortunately, that's not going for the Berserkers anytime soon. They also have the ability to scare the shit out of anything, including the massive war elephant, simply by putting on a throw rug on their head. Berserker is a very strong morale buster, and its high damage capacity allows it to cut away at units, but because of its low armor stats and its low melee defense stats, it's not wise to build high quantities of these units, let alone put them at the front lines. The best thing to do would be to use Berserkers as a flanking unit. While your mainline force is being bogged down in conflict, the Berserkers can come right in and cut away at those enemy units in the mob, able to destroy their morale through abilities and from the initial flanking maneuver. Keep them safe and keep them away from most of the fighting, as they cannot take too much punishment, but do not underestimate them if you ever come into conflict with them, as they will annihilate your troops if they use their abilities correctly. Their weaknesses include prolonged conflicts, cavalry attacks, and bombardment units such as artillery, archers, slingers, maximum machine guns, nuclear weapons, laser cannons, the works. Final melee unit we will be covering would be the Sword Masters. Now, the Sword Masters, unlike the Berserkers, have good stats across the board with less attack damage, charge bonus, morale, and health than its brother, but has enough armor to take a huge amount of punishment. The Sword Masters have the same abilities as the Berserkers, with a new passive ability called Encourage, which increases all the morale of the units around it. Now, the Sword Masters are one of the tankiest units for the
Suebi
faction, and their passive morale buffs allows them to synergize well with nearby units. A good tank to soak up most of the damage, while maybe a Berserker unit can go attack from the flanks and destroy the enemy at the sides. These units, like the Berserkers, are weak against cavalry, and it's unwise to run supersonic speed into a wall of Spartan spearmen as well, so do look both ways before walking down no man's land. And now we get on to the missile troops, ladies and gentlemen. First runner-up would be the dramatic youths, which are javelin men with the second highest damage output, but the lowest amount of range of all the units. They also have the fastest fire rate of any unit in the unit class, which is pretty good for them. Good job. They come with the ability to throw javelins on fire, which decreases the accuracy of the individual arrow, as well as increasing reload time. Cannot be used in wet weather, but increases damage towards buildings. However, keep in mind that it actually decreases damage towards units, so you might want to check before you use those flames of hell. They also come with the ability of quick reload, which increases the amount of shots they fire per minute, which is pretty good for them. Another missile troop would be the dramatic slingers, with the longest range of all the ranged troops for the faction, but the least amount of damage. They also have an insane amount of armor pen, which I hear is being addressed and balanced out, so that's good. The slingers have the same abilities as the javelin inbred cousins, but without flaming stones, which is unfortunate. The last missile unit we would be looking at will be the Longbow Hunters, which have the largest damage output of all the units, but the slowest fire rate. These troops are excellent in long-range bombardment skirmishes because of their high damage output. In terms of what range unit you should pick, it really falls down to you. Do you want the armor pen and the long-range capabilities of the slinger? Do you want the fast fire rate of the javelin men? Or do you want just the straight-up flat damage of the archers? The choice is yours, really. All of these units really act the same way as each other. They're used for harassment, for bombardment. They can take out stationary targets with ease, and javelin men as well as longbow hunters can switch on to flaming arrows or flaming javelins and basically turn the elephants into crazed derpa herps and go insane and kill everybody in sight. They are really weak units, however, and if you get these guys into melee conflict, they will fall. In fact, these guys will actually rout faster than a club levy or a bloodsworn, which is really pathetic. You shouldn't also target moving units, or moving cavalry units for that matter, with these units, except for elephants, because they're way too fast. Something like a bear, a horse, or a camel will just outrun any projectile you fire at it, which is crazy, really. You really do have to protect all of these bombardment and missile troops, however. You really do. Keep them in the back, keep them in reserve. Don't use them for aggressive play all the time, unless you have units backing up your missile troops. Then by all means, do some crazy aggressive play, because honestly, your kiting is probably much better than mine. Dramatic youths cost as much as 330 funds, while the slingers cost 320 and the archers cost 390. Before we talk about the first two spear units, let's discuss the abilities of all the spear units first. Now, shield screen is the first ability, which increases the bracing, melee defense, and shield strength of a unit, but unlike shield wall, it cannot move at all. The second ability would be Cavalry Counter Tactics, which improves its attack damage and improves a bunch of other stats versus cavalry units. So keep that in mind when fighting against elephants or the rampaging camel scourge. Now, the two units in question that I was going to compare right now would be the Spear Levy and the Spear Brothers. Now, the Spear Brothers is basically a straight upgrade from the Spear Levy, whereas the Spear Levy is more cheap. The Spear Brother is definitely more cost efficient and way more powerful because of their superior stats. Now, the next unit we're going to be looking at would be the Night Hunters. Now, the Night Hunters are a very strange unit. They have very unique gameplay styles, and although they have less armor than the Spear Brothers, they improve in every other stat. Now, these units have two new abilities which make them very unique. They have Guerrilla Development and Stalk, which allows Night Hunters to deploy outside the deploy zone at the start of the game, and also allows players to plan ambushes against your opponent, much like the grenade junkies in Shogun 2 days. Now, the last spear unit we're going to be looking at would be the Wooden's Spears, which are a significant improvement in all stats versus the other spear units, and have two new abilities that set them apart from every other spear unit. Charge Defense Expert, which allows them to gain more melee attack damage against incoming charging units, and the unit can encourage nearby units, giving them more morale, which is pretty good. For Club Levies and Spear Brothers, I use them primarily for meat shields, protecting real lines, and maybe even grouping them up with other cav units in order to gain the upper hand in a battle. A few spears could never hurt. Night Stalkers could be used and should be used for ambush as well as scouting, and attacking your opponent when he least expects. Finally, the Wooden Spearman should be used like a Yariasha Guru back in the day. Shield Screen plus anti-charge bonuses makes this particular unit a absolute beast at protecting your front line. Kind of like a bootleg Spartan Phalanx formation. These units are weak from melee units like swords and heavy spearmen / pikemen, so do keep that in mind when fighting other units, but these guys are bombs at killing cav. Spirit Levy costs 370 funds, by the way, while their inbred brother costs 480, and the Night Stalkers cost 700, with the Wooden Spearmen costing about 760, the most expensive spear unit that the faction has. Melee cav for the next group of units we're going to be looking at. There's only 2 units in this group, so it's going to be done rather quickly. Dramatic Scout Riders and Noble Riders will be the units in question. Both these units share the abilities of Wedge Formation and Frenzy Charge. Now, Wedge Formation increases the charge bonus and melee attack of the unit, but decreases the melee defense and the acceleration. While Frenzy Charge increases the charge bonus, the charge damage, and acceleration of the unit, but also decreases the melee defense. Now, the Dramatic Riders will be the first unit we'll be looking at in the melee cav category, and they're a very cheap unit indeed. 360 funds to buy this unit with pathetic stats makes sense for the amount of stats they have, and these units are really all useful for baiting out other units and making traps. They could also be used for hammer and anvil strikes, but keep in mind that putting these guys into prolonged conflict is possibly and probably suicidal. Now, finally, we have the Noble Riders to look forward to, which have 2 units which set them very far apart from their inbred brothers. And you've also seen these units previously. These abilities previously. Charge Defense Expert and Encourage. Now, this unit is a massive upgrade from the Scout Riders and has significant upgrades to all of its stats all around. They are excellent in prolonged conflict, and they have very high armor, health, and melee defense. This unit absolutely destroys other cav in conflicts, and their flanks are very powerful. More powerful than the Kool-Aid Man breaking down your house door. The Heroic Nobles are really good with synergizing with other units because of their morale bonuses, and their hammer and anvil strikes will practically annihilate other units. Now, both of these units are very weak to spearmen, and with the Dramatic Scout Riders being horrible in general, and the Noble Riders kicking ass all around, you really want to stick with the Noble Riders for the most part, unless you're making a very troll-esque build. The Dramatic Riders cost 360 funds, if you guys have forgotten already, and the Noble Riders cost 890. Because of the lack of unit variety with this faction, you really can't get too creative with the builds, and it's a pretty big downside on the faction as a whole, but try this on for size. It's a very heavy sword build. 4 Berserkers, 4 Swords Masters, 3 Noble Riders, and 5 Dramatic Youths. The build complements the strengths of the faction by being able to bring out heavy hitters like the Berserkers and Sword Masters into the fray, and how you use them is simple. Have the Sword Masters take the brunt of the fighting, while the Berserkers move in and flank the other units bogged down in the fighting already. With Headhunt and Frenzy activated for the Berserkers, cutting through enemy ranks will be as easy as peeling off onion skin. Then, using your Heroic Riders to attack the surrounding units in the rear and completely surround the enemy units, or use them to stop enemy cav from attacking your own infantry units. This all while the Dramatic Youths fire flaming arrows into the massive blob of units, causing a ton of damage. Now, the downside to this build is pretty obvious from the get-go. Not a lot of anti-cav solutions to fend off heavy cav builds. Also, the factions with better cav in general, such as Romans or the Parthians, could annihilate your heroic nobles. Variations to this build could be made in order to adapt to your opponent's build. For example, adding more wooden as spearmen or more heroic nobles will make your build a little bit more cav resistant. Now, taking out some archers for one more berserker unit or one more sword master could also work in your favor, but going heavy on weak lesser units could also be your downfall, so I really don't suggest that, like club levies or spear brothers. The faction's inherent problems are very apparent from the get-go. No source of heavy spearmen in sight or pikemen or any type of unit variety whatsoever. And while the heroic nobles and wooden spearmen are really good, they're simply not enough. This faction can also get kited to death by missile cav, and factions like Parthia and Egypt can basically raffle stomp them with superior cav units like horses, camels, elephants, zebras, gazelles, zombies, you name it, they got it. But when it comes to swords, oh my god, barbarian factions definitely take the cake, and their swordsmanship is superior. But if you like versatility with your factions, this faction in question is definitely a very weak one to choose. very, very, very weak. And while you can go for a heavy spear build, what you really need to go for are swords, 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 and more swords. At the time of this recording, there are no axes in question, but if they do come out with axes, I will definitely make an update on the faction in question. But for now, no axes. Sucks a lot of fucking dick, but whatever, that's life. Anyway, that's about it for this faction. A good anti-spear monster with a really good assortment of sword units to choose from and morale changing troops, but the lack of anti-cav solutions, no pikes, no missile cav, and just no unit variety whatsoever makes playing with them really tough against heavy horse factions. And with that said, guys, that's about it. Thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe, please like, please share this video around the world. And if you guys have any ideas of what faction I should choose next, please leave a comment down below. Thank you guys for watching. Bye-bye.